Some questions seem to span centuries, defying all easy answers. They hide between the lines of sacred texts, as if waiting for the right moment to be noticed. After all, what were the names of Adam and Eve's daughters? How long did the first human couple live in the garden before being sent away? And what is the true age of the earth? These are questions that stand the test of time, arousing an almost insatiable curiosity. Anyone who has delved into the scriptures with attention realizes that behind the best-known passages, there are blank spaces, gaps that spark the imagination and fuel the search for more. This is where the Book of Jubilees begins to gain relevance. Like the equally mysterious Book of Enoch, it not only expands on, but clarifies some of the most enigmatic passages left out of traditional versions. Many of the questions that linger in the most inquiring minds find explanations there that are so precise as to be disconcerting. An example of this appears in the very first pages. The names of Adam and Eve's daughters, often omitted from the canonical scriptures, are revealed: Awan and Azura. Small details like these completely reshape our view of the first chapters of humanity. The importance of this book began long before it was written. Tradition has it that during Moses' famous ascent to Mount Sinai, when he received the Ten Commandments, something much greater was given to him. It was not just laws written in stone, but a true expanded revelation. According to the account in Jubilees, an angel was tasked with transmitting to Moses a series of information not found in other texts. This heavenly messenger was responsible for dictating the complete history, from creation to the days of the prophet, with all the details omitted by the other scriptures. Although it bears similarities to Genesis and Exodus, the Book of Jubilees is distinguished precisely by its revealing additions. It introduces us to the creation of angels, classified into 4 distinct orders: those who stand before the divine presence, those consecrated to holiness, the guardians of men, and those who regulate the elements of nature. Each group has its own mission, part of a cosmic plan that goes beyond common human understanding. In addition, the book tells us that exactly 2,110 years passed between creation and the moment when the law was given to Moses, a fact so precise that it forces us to rethink conventional chronology. Among so many surprises, there is one that stands out: the assertion that Hebrew was the original language of creation. It was not limited to humans. All living beings, according to the text, understood this primordial language. The idea may seem bold, but it is supported by ancient traditions and historical evidence, since the first biblical records were written in this language long before the cultural domination imposed by the Roman Empire and the spread of Greek. With the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, fragments of the Book of Jubilees came to light, shedding new light on ancient religious practices. Many of the festivities and commandments attributed to the Torah were already observed by figures prior to Moses. This suggests that the precepts did not arise suddenly, but were the result of wisdom passed down through generations, a progressive revelation that culminated at Sinai. The very name of the book alludes to its temporal organization, the Jubilees. Each cycle lasts 49 years, with the 50th marked as a year of liberation and renewal. This system was confirmed in other biblical books, such as Leviticus, and is still used today to mark special occasions, such as the well-known Golden Jubilee. But what few people know is that the Book of Jubilees provides a detailed calendar designed to align sacred festivals with the rhythms of heaven and earth. Nothing was random. In the second chapter, the order of time gains even more depth. An angel commands Moses to record exactly everything that was created, day by day. Right in the first chapter, in addition to the separation between light and darkness, the emergence of angels is described in great detail. In the following verses, the Sabbath is presented as a pillar of the covenant, accompanied by specific rules that went beyond physical rest. A curious detail is the prohibition of marital intimacy on that day, even between spouses, something rarely mentioned in today's religious circles. These revelations do not arise to create conflict, but to broaden horizons. It is as if forgotten windows were opening, illuminating truths that had always been there, hidden, waiting to be seen. The story of the patriarchs takes on new layers. The ancient commandments reveal deeper intentions, and the very concept of time comes to be understood as something sacred, carefully ordered. In the next chapter, Adam and Eve reappear under a different light. We discover that they remained in Eden for 7 years before the fall, which radically changes our understanding of their journey. It was only after their expulsion that they began to have children. This raises an unexpected question. Why did they not have offspring while they lived in paradise? Could it be that, in that pure and divine environment, procreation was not part of the original purpose? It may seem like mere symbolic provocation, but it reveals something profound about the relationship between the sacred responsibility and the right time for everything. In the next chapter, a new phase of history comes to life with the arrival of Noah and his companion, Emzerah. The episode of the flood, recounted in greater detail than in traditional accounts, is presented as a watershed, not only literal, but also spiritual. When the waters receded and dry land reappeared, God instructed Noah to pass on an essential teaching to the people. The true year has 364 days. This was a precise count, based on the movement of the sun, which differed from the lunar logic of 360 days adopted in other cultures and religious systems of the time. This detail may seem subtle, but it carries deep symbolism. Time, for the Book of Jubilees, was not just a practical measure. It was sacred. Organizing the days correctly meant aligning oneself with the divine rhythm of creation. Unlike the lunar calendar, which underwent constant adjustments, the 364-day solar cycle brought harmony and predictability. Many scholars see this as one of the central motivations of the work, to reaffirm a model of time that, according to tradition, had been revealed since the beginning of time, but had been corrupted over the ages. Despite its relevance and consistency with the spirit of the Scriptures, the Book of Jubilees never found its official place among the texts recognized by most religious traditions. This raises an inevitable question. How could so much compatible and enriching content have been left out? Unfortunately, the answer is rarely found in the field of pure theology. The filter through which these writings passed was fraught with interests and disputes. And when faith mixes with politics, decisions are no longer guided solely by the search for truth. Unlike other texts considered apocryphal, full of excessive allegories or glaring contradictions, Jubilees stands out for its consistency. Its accounts do not attempt to rewrite what was already accepted, but rather to expand, detail, and clarify. It walks side by side with the books of Genesis and Exodus, offering answers where there was once silence. Precisely for this reason, many see it not as a threat, but as a forgotten gem, a book that could have enriched the spiritual understanding of millions had it received official approval. An impressive example of this seriousness is linked to an archaeological artifact discovered in Israel. It is a carefully carved bone plate dating from the 7th century BC. On it are rows of small holes, 12 in one row, 10 in 3 others. Archaeologist Avram Byron proposed that this object functioned as a kind of day marker. A stake would be moved from hole to hole, marking the passage of time with precision. 3 other holes at the top suggest the marking of seasons or seasonal divisions. The similarity to the system described in the Book of Jubilees is so striking that many experts have come to consider the text not only plausible, but probably based on actual practices of the time. Even with evidence of this caliber, the absence of Jubilees in the official compilations of the Bible raises suspicions. The organization of the Bible as we know it today began to take shape only in the 4th century of the Christian era, during the process of institutionalizing the Church within the Roman Empire. In this context, many decisions were made more for political convenience than for spiritual inspiration. There was an urgency to build a single, cohesive, and centralized doctrine. Any book that offered divergent information, even if legitimate, could undermine this project of unity. Over the centuries, internal conflicts intensified. The schism between the Western and Eastern churches in the 11th century exposed deep divisions on doctrinal issues. Decades later, in the 16th century, another even more radical upheaval would emerge: the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther led a movement that not only confronted the abuses of the Roman clergy, but also openly questioned the content of the Scriptures. Books such as Jubilees were simply removed from the New Protestant version, along with others considered not in line with Reformed theology. Interestingly, not even the Apocalypse escaped Luther's suspicion. He almost succeeded in removing it as well. To think that one of the most impactful books in the Bible was on the verge of disappearing is frightening. Its symbolic and grandiose visions echo to this day, inspiring everything from theological treatises to fiction series and animations. This failed attempt at exclusion raises a provocative question. Did anyone succeed in doing the same with the Book of Jubilees? It is important to remember that those responsible for these choices were not beings enlightened by some divine power, but ordinary people, influenced by their contexts, their fears, and their ambitions. In deciding what the population could read, they left out not only Jubilees, but also a significant portion of the ancient spiritual tradition. This forces us to reflect. How many truths are still hidden, suffocated under layers of historical convenience? The history of the Geneva Bible is another little-known chapter that helps illustrate this dynamic. Before the famous King James Version, the faithful read a Bible with more than 80 books. The Geneva Bible, published in 1560, was the favorite of the Pilgrims and Puritans who migrated to the Americas. Even with the King's official version already available, they preferred the one they considered more authentic and less manipulated. The reason for this preference lies between the lines. The Geneva Bible featured side notes and critical commentary. It denounced practices such as slavery, condemned the absolute authority of kings, and defended the participation of lay people in the spiritual leadership of communities. These observations deeply disturbed the British monarchy to the point that King James decreed its prohibition in 1616. Possessing a copy could have serious consequences. The exclusion of the Book of Jubilees seems to follow this same pattern. Where there is uncomfortable truth, there is imposed silence. But texts like this withstand the test of time, waiting only for a careful eye to bring them back to light. The criticism embedded in the Geneva Bible did not only target religious dogma, it was a direct attack on the power structure headed by James. Feeling threatened, the monarch spared no effort to neutralize what he considered a challenge to his authority. By sponsoring the creation of the King James Version, KJV, his intention was not only to offer a new translation, it was to impose an official version that would serve his interests and consolidate his position as God's anointed sovereign. Even so, resistance was intense. The faithful and scholars continued to value the Geneva Bible, recognizing it as a more faithful reading, free from political manipulation. Faced with this rejection, the king intensified his actions. He ordered the public burning of copies of the rival Bible, banned its circulation, and punished those who used it. This campaign was not based on profound spiritual differences, but rather on the desire to impose control over what people could and could not access. It is yet another example of how the history of faith has often been shaped not by a sincere search for truth, but by the firm hand of those in power. In this scenario of disputes and repression, the Book of Jubilees may have been yet another forgotten victim. Not because it contained heresies, but because it presented a version that escaped the control of established religious institutions. Many texts of great spiritual value were silenced because they did not fit the guidelines of the time. History shows that the exclusion of a book from the canon was not always the result of its irrelevance. On the contrary, in certain cases, its removal said more about the fear of its teachings than about the veracity of its content. Within the universe of Scripture, ancient texts are usually divided into three main categories, used to assess their legitimacy and importance. The first group brings together universally accepted books, 39 texts present in both the Jewish tradition and the Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox Bibles. Despite the differences between these traditions, all agree on the divine inspiration of these works. The second group comprises the Apocrypha. Some include them in their editions of the Bible, while others ignore or reject them. This group is a field of dispute. Depending on the branch, the same text can be considered revelatory or irrelevant. These are books that cause divisions, not because of their lack of content, but because they touch on sensitive points of doctrine. The third group, more controversial, is known as pseudepigrapha. The term, which can be translated as falsely attributed, encompasses works whose authorship is considered doubtful. Many of these works claim to have been written by important biblical figures such as Moses, Enoch, or even the apostles. However, scholars point out that these claims are unfounded, based on historical, linguistic, and contextual analysis. For this reason, these texts are widely rejected by major religious traditions and are seen as creative but without a solid foundation. At this point, the Book of Jubilees finds itself in an uncomfortable position. It claims to have been written by Moses, at God's direct command, during his stay on Mount Sinai. However, academic analysis indicates that it was produced many centuries after the death of the Hebrew prophet. This discrepancy between what the text claims and what historical research points to calls into question its credibility in the eyes of religious institutions. One of the elements that raises the most doubts is the solar calendar proposed by the book. In it, the year is divided into 364 days, distributed over 12 months of 30 days, with 4 additional days added to complete the cycle. These 4 extra days would represent the transitions between seasons. However, an archaeological discovery has brought complexity to the debate. The bone plate found, possibly used to mark the days of the year, had 3 holes at the top, not 4, which would indicate a triple division, similar to the Egyptian structure, with 3 seasons of 120 days each. This inconsistency raises questions about the real origin of the system defended in Jubilees. Another reason for the book's exclusion from the canon was its habit of retelling familiar stories from a new perspective. In many cases, the events of Genesis are rewritten with significant changes. These modifications not only contradict the most widely accepted versions, but also raise suspicions about the author's intentions. For traditions that value textual integrity, this reinterpretation can be seen as an attempt to rewrite sacred history according to a personal view, rather than as a faithful transmission of divine revelation. Even so, there are those who see Jubilees as a valuable continuation of the books of Genesis and Exodus. By being dubbed Little Genesis, the book gains the status of an extension, a supplement that seeks to explain and detail events often treated briefly in other scriptures. Patriarchs such as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are presented not as fallible men, but as supreme examples of obedience and holiness. In the text, they follow divine laws from birth, practicing ceremonies that, in the traditional Bible, would only be instituted much later, with Moses. These differences also appear in the most emblematic episodes. The relationship between Jacob and Isaac, for example, is softened. The famous episode of the blessing, where Jacob deceives his father to receive the birthright, disappears. In place of deception, there is legitimate recognition. The marriage to Leah is also transformed. Instead of an unwanted exchange, it becomes a conscious choice. In the case of Abraham, the episode in which he lies to King Abimelech, saying that Sarah is his sister, is simply ignored. The author's intention seems clear: to present a lineage of patriarchs above any fault, idealized as models of perfect conduct. This effort at idealization, however, ends up running into a pertinent criticism. The great power of the traditional Bible lies precisely in its humanity. Its characters, even the most exalted, stumble, err, and repent. And it is in this process that many find comfort and identification. When these imperfections are erased, the emotional connection can be lost. Spirituality, instead of bringing us closer, creates distance. Furthermore, Jubilees adopts an extremely rigid stance on divine laws. Its severity is striking. Eating blood, for example, is described as such a serious offense that not only the transgressor, but their entire lineage must be eliminated. Interracial marriages or marriages with foreigners are punishable by death, by stoning. And on the Sabbath, the strictness is even greater. Fasting on that day is prohibited and punishable by death. These points put the book in direct conflict with important examples from biblical tradition. Moses fasted for 40 days in the desert. So did Jesus. Both fasted on Saturdays during that period. If what the Book of Jubilees proposes were followed to the letter, these sacred acts would be seen as mortal transgressions. And that raises a theological dilemma that is difficult to ignore. Certain content does not appear by chance, and when it does, it is a sign that the time has come to access it. The forbidden name of Jesus is available, but not for long. You can still secure your copy, but the last few copies are going fast. Take advantage while there is still time. When observing the tone of the Book of Jubilees, one notices a trait common to more radical religious groups: an unusual rigidity that goes beyond mere devotion. This indicates that the author did not write solely with the intention of recounting ancient facts, but rather to shape the behavior and customs of his own time. There are strong indications that this work originated within the Essene community of Qumran, the same group responsible for preserving the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Essenes were known for their strict discipline and reclusive lifestyle, distancing themselves from the practices of the priests of the Temple of Jerusalem and embracing an isolated existence based on fasting, purity rituals, and absolute fidelity to what they considered the true law. This way of life is directly reflected in the demands proposed by the Book of Jubilees. The laws are harsher, the calendar is different, and there is a clear criticism of other religious strands of Judaism, especially the Pharisees and Sadducees. It is no coincidence that the calendar described is identical to that of other texts produced by the Essenes. The intention was clear: to consolidate a worldview that directly confronted the Greek influence that was spreading rapidly throughout the Jewish territory during the Hellenistic period. The rejection of public nudity, critically addressed in the book, refers to the Greek gymnasiums built in Jerusalem from 175 BC, where men trained naked, something abominable to religious conservatives. Jubilee emerges as a response to this cultural clash, a manifesto against Hellenization and in defense of a tradition that the Essenes considered threatened. Many scholars therefore consider its exclusion from the canon to be justified. The work distorts passages, imposes excessive severity, and propagates a narrow view of the faith. Still, not all forgotten books met the same fate for legitimate reasons. The case of the Book of Enoch remains open, and perhaps hides truths yet to be revealed.